The Last Tenant. The apartment building at 47 Lane had stood empty for 11 months before I moved in. Not because it was old or run down. It was actually quite beautiful. A 4-story brick Victorian with wrought iron balconies and tall windows that caught the afternoon light like stained glass. The problem was the rumors. People said the last tenant on the 4th floor never left. Not in the usual way. I didn't believe in ghosts. I was 29, freshly divorced, broke, and desperate for a cheap place in a quiet neighborhood. When the landlord, Mr. Harrow, showed me Unit 4B, he barely mentioned the history. He just said the previous tenant had moved out suddenly and left most of her things behind. The rent was $650 a month. Impossible to pass up in this part of the city. The day I moved in, it was raining hard. My sneakers squeaked on the polished hardwood as I carried the last box up the narrow staircase. The building smelled of old wood, lemon polish, and something faintly metallic underneath, like blood left too long on steel. Unit 4B was at the end of the hall. The door was already unlocked. Inside, the apartment looked like someone had just stepped out for coffee and never returned. A half-drunk mug of tea sat on the kitchen counter, the liquid long evaporated into a brown ring. A woman's red cardigan hung over the back of a wooden chair. Books were stacked neatly on the coffee table, mostly poetry and true crime. I set my boxes down and wiped rain from my face. The silence was thick, almost watchful. That first night, I dreamed of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right in front of 4B. Then nothing. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. with my heart hammering. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I told myself it was just the stress of the divorce. By the end of the first week, small things started happening. My keys would move from the hook by the door to the kitchen table while I was in the shower. The red cardigan, which I had thrown into a donation box, would reappear folded on my bed. One morning, I found the half-drunk mug filled with fresh tea, still warm. I started sleeping with the lights on. The building had only 3 other tenants, an elderly couple on the 1st floor who never left their apartment, and a quiet man in his 40s named Daniel on the 2nd floor. I met him on the stairs one evening while taking out trash. "New tenant?" he asked, nodding at the bag in my hand. "Yeah, 4B. He paused, his eyes flicking upward toward the ceiling. "Be careful up there." "Why?" Daniel adjusted his glasses. "The woman who lived there before, her name was Elena Voss. She was a writer, kept to herself. One day she just stopped coming out. Landlord found her door wide open, all her stuff still there. No note, no body, nothing." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "What happened to her?" "No one knows. Cops called it a missing persons case. Closed it after a few months, but people say she's still up there, watching." I laughed it off, but that night I heard the footsteps again. This time they were inside my apartment. They started in the kitchen, soft padding across the linoleum, then moved into the living room. I lay frozen in bed, phone in hand, 911 already dialed, but not pressed. The steps came closer, stopping at the foot of my bed. I could hear breathing. Slow, steady, female breathing. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. Week 2 brought the notes. They appeared in places I knew I hadn't left them. First on the bathroom mirror, written in condensation. "You look tired, Marcus. My name is Marcus Hale. I never told anyone in the building my first name. The second note was on my laptop screen when I woke up one morning, typed in a new document. She liked the rain, too. It hid the sounds. I started recording myself sleeping with my phone. The footage showed nothing unusual until the third night. At 3:33 a.m., the camera captured a pale hand reaching from the darkness beside my bed, gently closing the laptop lid. I moved the bed away from the wall after that. I tried talking to Mr. Harrow about it. He was a thin, balding man in his 60s with watery blue eyes that never quite met mine. "Kids playing pranks," he muttered, counting rent money at his desk. "Or maybe you're just stressed. Divorce does that." "How do you know about my divorce?" He smiled thinly. "Paperwork, son. You listed it on the application." I didn't believe him. That afternoon, I went to the public library and looked up Eleanor Vos. There were only a few articles. She was 31 when she disappeared. A reclusive author who had published 2 horror novels under a pen name. The last known photo showed a woman with long dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. In the photo, she was standing in front of the window in 4B, the same window I now slept beside. The dreams got worse. In them, I wasn't myself. I was Elena. I felt her fear, her paranoia, the way the walls seemed to breathe around her. She wrote at a small desk by the window, her fingers flying across the keyboard, while something moved behind her reflection in the glass. One night in the dream, she turned around suddenly and whispered, "It's not in the walls. It's wearing them." I woke up screaming. The next morning, I found a new stack of papers on my desk, handwritten pages in elegant, slanted script. Elena's handwriting. I was sure of it. The title at the top read, "The Tenant." It was the beginning of a story about a man who moves into an apartment where the previous tenant never left. The descriptions matched my life exactly. The red cardigan, the tea mug, the footsteps at 3:33 a.m. The last line on the final page was, "He still doesn't understand that he's not the new tenant. He's the next chapter." I burned the pages in the kitchen sink. The smoke detector didn't go off. The fire alarm stayed silent, even as black smoke filled the apartment. That was when I knew the building wasn't just haunted. It was hungry. I started researching the building's history more seriously. Old newspaper archives, property records, even cold case forums. 47 Hawthorne Lane had a pattern. Every 4 to 6 years, a tenant on the 4th floor would disappear without a trace. Always a single person. Always someone going through a major life change. Divorce, job loss, grief. The disappearances stretched back to the 1970s. Before that, the building had been a boarding house where several suicides occurred in the same unit. The police never connected the cases, different decades, different detectives, but the pattern was there if you looked hard enough. I found one surviving interview with the woman who had lived in 4B in 1998. She told a reporter, "It starts with small things, objects moving, notes, then it learns your name, then it learns your fears. By the end, you're writing the story of your own disappearance, and you don't even realize you're doing it." The woman had moved out after 2 weeks. She was one of the lucky ones. I wasn't going to be lucky. By the end of the 3rd week, Eleanor was no longer hiding. I would see her in reflections, standing behind me in the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair while I brushed my teeth. When I turned around, nothing was there. But the smell of her perfume, jasmine, and something sharper, like rust, lingered for hours. She started speaking to me directly. Not out loud at first. In my head. Soft whispers while I was trying to work. You left her, didn't you? Your wife. Just like my husband left me. I never told anyone about the details of my divorce. Not here. He said I was too much, too dark, too obsessed with the things that watch us from the corners. I started answering her. At first to make her stop. Then because I was lonely in a way I hadn't been since the divorce. We talked at night. She told me how the thing in the apartment had started as a shadow in her peripheral vision, how it learned to copy her handwriting, her voice, her smell, how it fed on the stories she wrote, horror stories that became real the moment she typed them. It wants a new author, she whispered one night while I sat on the floor with my back against the wall. Someone to keep writing the building's story. That's why it keeps the last tenant's things. To pass them on. What happens when the new tenant finishes the story? I asked. Elena's voice grew sad. Then the tenant becomes part of the building, and the cycle starts again. I tried to leave. Twice. The first time, I packed everything in one frantic afternoon. As I dragged my suitcase to the door, the handle broke off in my hand. When I looked down, the suitcase was empty. All my clothes were back in the drawers, perfectly folded. The red cardigan was on top. The second time, I made it as far as the stairs. The lights in the hallway flickered, then went out completely. In the darkness, I felt hands. Many hands. Gently pushing me back toward 4B. Soft female hands. Cold. Insistent. When the lights came back on, I was sitting at Elena's old desk, staring at a blank page in her notebook. My hand was holding a pen. I had written 3 lines without realizing it. Marcus Hale moved into 4B on a rainy Thursday. He thought he could leave. He was wrong. The thing stopped pretending. I started seeing it clearly now. Not Elena, but the shape that had been wearing her. It was tall and thin, with too many joints. Its skin was the color of old wallpaper, patterned with faint floral designs from the apartment walls. When it moved, the pattern shifted like it was still part of the building. It didn't speak. It just watched me write. Because I was writing now. Every night. Pages and pages of the story of my own haunting. I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me like blood from a wound I couldn't close. The story was good, terrifying. The kind of horror that makes readers sleep with the lights on. That was what it wanted. One night, about 6 weeks after I moved in, I woke up to find Elena sitting on the edge of my bed. Not the thing wearing her. Her. The real Elena Voss. She looked exactly like her photo, but paler, almost translucent. Her eyes were full of pity. "You're almost done," she said softly. "The story is nearly finished." I sat up, heart racing. How do I stop it? You can't. Not once it chooses you, but you can choose how it ends. She reached out and touched my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Make the ending hurt it," she whispered. "Make the readers afraid to ever live alone again. Make them burn the book when they finish it." Then she was gone. I wrote the final chapter that night. In it, the protagonist realizes too late that the building isn't haunted by a ghost. It is the ghost. The walls are made of previous tenants. Their skin stretched into wallpaper, their bones supporting the beams, their screams muffled into the creaking of old floorboards. The protagonist tries to burn the apartment, but the fire won't catch. The building won't let him leave the story. In the last paragraph, he sits down at the desk one final time and begins typing the story of the next tenant. A lonely woman who will move in after him, desperate and broken, just like he was. I titled the manuscript The Last Tenant and left it open on the desk. Then I walked to the window. It was raining again, just like the day I moved in. I opened the window wide. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet pavement and distant thunder. Behind me, I heard the thing approach, the soft rustle of wallpaper skin, the clicking of too many joints. I didn't turn around. Instead, I climbed onto the windowsill. "If I jump," I said quietly, "the story ends with me. No new chapter, no new author. You lose." The thing stopped moving. For the first time, I felt it hesitate. I smiled, even though my legs were shaking. "Tell the next one I said hello." I stepped off the ledge. The fall lasted longer than it should have. 4 stories became 40. 40 became 400. I fell through darkness and rain and the sound of pages turning. When I hit the ground, there was no pain. Only the sensation of hands pulling me upward. Not out of the building, but into it. Into the walls. Into the story. Mr. Harrow showed the new tenant around 4B 3 days later. The young woman, 27, recently laid off, fresh out of a bad relationship, looked around the apartment with wide eyes. "It's beautiful," she said. "A little creepy, but I like it." Mr. Harrow smiled his thin smile. Previous tenant left suddenly. Left most of his things behind, including a manuscript on the desk. Quite good, actually. Horror story. The woman picked up the stack of pages. The title read The Last Tenant in neat handwriting. She flipped to the last page. The final line was new. It hadn't been there when Marcus wrote it. It read, "She moved in on a rainy Thursday. She thought the building was just old. She was wrong." The woman shivered and set the manuscript down. "I'll take it," she said. As she signed the lease, something moved in the reflection of the tall window behind her. A tall, thin shape with wallpaper skin, smiling with too many teeth. In the walls, Marcus Hale tried to scream. But the building had already used his voice for the creaking floorboards. And the story continued. End. It always begins with something small, something easy to ignore. A noise, a shadow, a feeling that disappears the moment you try to understand it. In the quiet outskirts of Louisiana, Detective Aaron Blake was not the kind of man who believed in things he couldn't explain. 20 years on the force had hardened him, turned every mystery into a solvable equation. But at 3:17 a.m., when the call came in, something felt wrong. The dispatcher's voice was shaky, almost breaking. "We have a missing persons case. Entire family, no signs of exit." Blake arrived at the house within minutes. A modest suburban home, lights still on, front door slightly open. Inside, the air felt thick, like stepping into a room that hadn't been touched by time. The dining table was set, 4 plates, food half-eaten, now cold and beginning to rot. Glasses of water untouched, chairs slightly pulled back, as if the family had just stood up and vanished. No struggle, no blood, no broken windows, nothing. Except one detail that immediately stood out. Every mirror in the house had been turned toward the wall. Bathroom mirrors. Bedroom mirrors. Even a small decorative mirror near the staircase, all of them deliberately repositioned. Blake frowned. "Who does that?" one officer whispered. Blake didn't answer. He just stared at the reflections. Or rather, the absence of them. At the same time, miles away in Ohio, Mia Carter sat in front of her laptop, streaming to a small but loyal audience. She wasn't famous. but she had enough followers to feel like someone was always watching her. Her apartment was small, cluttered, and poorly lit. The perfect setting for late-night content. "You guys ever feel like your house makes noise when it shouldn't?" she asked casually, laughing. "Like, not normal house noise. Something else." Her chat filled with jokes. "Ghosts. Girl run. Probably rats." Mia rolled her eyes. "No, seriously. I've been hearing scratching inside the walls for like a week now." She paused. There it was again, a faint scraping sound like nails dragging across wood. Her smile faded slightly. "Okay, that wasn't me." The chat exploded. "Fake! Scripted! Turn off the lights!" Mia hesitated, then reached over and clicked the lamp off. Darkness swallowed the room except for the glow of her screen. The scratching stopped. Silence. Too much silence. Then from somewhere behind her, a whisper, barely audible. "You finally heard me." Mia froze. Her viewers spammed messages. "What was that? Behind you! Turn around!" Slowly she did. The camera continued recording. The vent on the wall behind her was slightly open, and inside it, something moved. The stream cut to black. In Nevada, the desert stretched endlessly under the night sky, illuminated only by the pale glow of the moon. Daniel Ross had been driving for hours. Trucking was a lonely job, but he preferred it that way. No people, no complications, just the road. At 2:03 a.m., he saw her. A woman walking barefoot along the highway. No shoes, no bag, no car in sight, just walking. Slowly, deliberately. Daniel slowed down. "Hey," he called out, rolling down the window. "You okay?" She didn't respond at first. Then she turned her head. Something about her movement felt unnatural. Too smooth. Too controlled. He stepped out of the truck. "Ma'am?" She looked up at him. That's when he saw her eyes, completely black. No white, no pupils, just darkness. Daniel's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to run. Without saying another word, he got back into his truck and drove away. Fast, too fast. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. He tried to calm himself down, convincing himself it was just his imagination. Then slowly he turned his head toward the passenger seat. She was already there. Detective Blake couldn't sleep that night. The image of the house lingered in his mind, replaying itself over and over. Something about those mirrors disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. The next evening he returned alone. Officially, it was to gather more evidence. Unofficially, he needed answers. The house felt colder this time, quieter, like it was waiting. Blake walked through each room carefully, noting every detail. Then he reached the hallway mirror, the only one that hadn't been turned. He stopped. Something felt off. He stepped closer and looked at his reflection. It stared back at him. Normal, still. Then slowly, it smiled. Blake didn't. His heart skipped a beat. He stepped back, but the reflection didn't move. It remained there, smiling wider, eyes locked onto his. "No," Blake whispered. He turned away quickly, breathing heavily. When he looked back again, it was normal. Just his reflection. Nothing more. He exhaled sharply, trying to regain control. "You're tired," he told himself. That's all. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. In Ohio, Mia's disappearance quickly gained attention online. Her last video went viral. Thousands of viewers analyzed it frame by frame. And then someone noticed it. A single frame barely visible. Inside the vent behind her, a face, pale, thin, eyes wide open, watching her, always watching. Police were called to her apartment. They broke the door open. The place was empty. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, just like the Louisiana case. But inside the walls, they found something horrifying. Scratch marks, hundreds of them, deep, frantic, covering the inner surfaces, as if something had been trapped inside, trying desperately to get out, or worse, trying to get in. In Nevada, Daniel pulled into a roadside motel, desperate for rest. His mind refused to process what had happened. He checked in, avoiding eye contact with the receptionist. "Room 6, she said quietly, handing him the key. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "You're not alone, are you?" Daniel forced a laugh. "Yeah, just me." He walked quickly to his room, locked the door, and collapsed onto the bed. Silence filled the space. He stared at the ceiling, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Then he noticed the mirror across the room. At first it looked normal, but then he saw it, a figure standing behind him, slowly forming. The black-eyed woman. He turned around instantly. Nothing. The room was empty. He looked back at the mirror. She was closer now. Blake dug deeper into the house's history and uncovered something chilling. Every 10 years, a family disappeared from that exact location. Same pattern, same time, 3:17 a.m. No survivors, no explanations. That night, Blake made a decision. He would stay inside the house and wait. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m., then 2. The house remained silent. But at exactly 3:17, footsteps echoed from upstairs. Slow, heavy. Blake drew his gun and moved carefully toward the sound. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the bedroom, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the missing family stood in the corner, motionless, their faces pale, eyes empty, watching him. One of them stepped forward, its mouth opened, and in a voice that wasn't human, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come." The lights went out instantly. In Ohio, Mia's channel suddenly uploaded a new video. No one knew how. The police had her equipment. But the video was there, and it was real. Mia sat in darkness, her face barely visible. She smiled. Too wide, too unnatural. "They let me out," she whispered. "Now I need someone to take my place." The video ended. Comments flooded in. But one detail terrified everyone. Mia had no reflection. In Nevada, Daniel woke up unable to move. Sleep paralysis. His chest felt heavy. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then slowly she appeared, crawling onto him, her black eyes staring directly into his soul. "You saw me," she whispered. "That means I can stay." Her hand reached toward his face. Everything went dark. The next morning, Blake's car was found outside the house, engine still running, but Blake was gone. Inside the house, everything looked normal again, except one thing, a mirror in the hallway, now facing outward. In Ohio, another viewer went to Mia's apartment. He entered slowly, camera recording. At first, everything seemed normal. Then he noticed the walls. They were moving, breathing, expanding and contracting like lungs. Then a voice whispered, "Your turn." The camera fell. The video ended. In Nevada, motel staff found Daniel sitting in the corner of his room, eyes completely black, repeating the same sentence over and over. She needed a ride. Weeks later, reports spread across the country. People disappearing at exactly 3:17 a.m., mirrors turning on their own, voices inside walls, and a woman walking barefoot on empty highways, waiting. Because once you notice them, They never leave. Title: The Last Broadcast. It started with a sound, low, distorted, almost like a whisper trapped inside an old radio. Daniel wasn't supposed to be in the station that late. The small-town broadcasting room had been shut down for years, abandoned after a mysterious fire that no one ever fully explained. But Daniel, being a freelance content creator chasing viral horror stories, had heard rumors. People claimed that if you tune the frequency to 101.9 FM after midnight, you could hear something unnatural. At first, he laughed it off. Urban legends always made for good views. But when his equipment picked up a faint signal at exactly 12:03 a.m., his curiosity turned into obsession. The audio wasn't clear, it crackled with static, but beneath it there was a voice, slow, hollow, almost human. "Do you hear me?" it said. Daniel froze. The station had no power, no working transmitters, yet the voice was coming through, clearer now. "If you hear this, don't turn around." He chuckled nervously, assuming it was interference or someone pranking him. But then he noticed something strange. His recording device showed a second audio track, one he hadn't started. It was recording him not from his mic, but from somewhere behind him. He played it back, and his blood ran cold. It was his own breathing, followed by a second, heavier breath just inches away. Daniel slowly turned, despite the warning. The room was empty. Dust floated in the dim beam of his flashlight. Old chairs lay overturned, and the control panel was covered in ash and burn marks. But something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the radio crackled louder. "You turned around," the voice said, now clearer, almost disappointed. "You weren't supposed to." The lights flickered, even though there was no electricity. Daniel's heart pounded as the temperature dropped sharply. He could see his breath. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. A shadow, too dark, too solid, slid along the wall, bending unnaturally as if it didn't follow the rules of light. "This station burned," the voice continued. "They all burned, but I didn't leave." Daniel stumbled back, his flashlight shaking. "Who's there?" he shouted, trying to sound brave but failing miserably. The shadow stopped. Slowly it turned toward him, though it had no face. "You invited me," it whispered. "You tuned in." The realization hit him like a punch. The frequency wasn't just a signal, it was a door,